It started like any other day at the airport, a routine morning filled with the hum of engines, the chatter of flight crews, and the distant echo of boarding announcements. Captain Daniel Reeves had flown for over 20 years. He had seen it all: last-minute schedule changes, high-profile passengers, and even the occasional mechanical failure. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared him for what was about to happen. As he walked through the terminal, his neatly pressed uniform and confident stride made him stand out. To most people, he was just another pilot, but to those who knew him, he was one of the best. He had flown celebrities, world leaders, and even royalty. Yet when he glanced down at his flight assignment for the day, he froze. Barron Trump. His grip on the tablet tightened. The name alone was enough to make his heart race, but it wasn't the young man that unsettled him. It was the weight of who he was, the former president's son, someone constantly in the public eye. The media followed his every move, and any interaction with him could easily turn into a headline. But that wasn't the real problem. Daniel hesitated. His mind raced with memories, ones he had buried deep, ones he never wanted to resurface. There was a reason he couldn't take this flight. A reason that had nothing to do with Barron himself. He exhaled sharply and turned to the gate agent. "I can't fly this one." The woman at the desk blinked, confused. "Captain Reeves, this is a private charter. It's already been arranged." "What do you mean you can't fly?" He shook his head. There's a conflict. I need to be reassigned." The agent frowned, glancing at the flight log. "Sir, this isn't a commercial flight. This was a special request. You were personally chosen for this assignment." Daniel felt a cold chill creep up his spine. Chosen? Why? Out of all the pilots available, why him? He swallowed hard. "Who requested me?" She hesitated before answering. "His mother." For a moment, the entire airport seemed to fade into silence. The weight of that name, the implication of it, crashed down on him like a tidal wave. He had spent years running from the past, hiding from the truth. But now, it had finally caught up to him, and there was no way out. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He had spent years mastering his emotions, keeping his past locked away where it couldn't touch him. But now, in a single moment, everything was unraveling. The name, the request, it wasn't a coincidence. He knew that much. But why now? And why him? The gate agent was still watching him, waiting for an answer. He had to think fast. If he refused outright, it would raise questions. And questions were dangerous. Forcing a steady breath, he nodded. "All right, I'll fly." The words tasted foreign on his tongue, but there was no other choice. He grabbed his flight bag and walked toward the private terminal, every step feeling heavier than the last. The closer he got to the aircraft, the louder the thoughts in his head became. By the time he reached the plane, Barron Trump was already waiting. He was taller than Daniel had expected, standing near the steps of the jet with a quiet, composed demeanor. There was something in his expression, something observant, almost calculating, like he was trying to read the world around him without giving away his own thoughts. Daniel had flown high-profile passengers before, but this felt different. There was an unspoken weight in the air. Barron glanced up as Daniel approached, his blue eyes locking onto him for just a second too long. Then, with a nod, he turned and boarded the plane. Daniel hesitated. He wanted to walk away, to pretend. This flight wasn't happening. But the truth was already clawing its way to the surface, and soon there would be no escaping it. As he stepped into the cockpit, his co-pilot, James Carter, gave him a glance. "Everything all right?" Daniel forced, a tight smile. "Yeah, just another day." But it wasn't, and he knew it. The pre-flight checks were a blur. Muscle memory took over as he went through the routine, his hands moving without thought while his mind raced. Then, just as he was about to request clearance, A voice crackled in his headset. "Captain Reeves, you have a secured message." His stomach twisted. This wasn't normal. He exchanged a glance with James, then pressed the button. A familiar voice filled his ear, one he hadn't heard in years. "Hello, Daniel." His fingers clenched around the control panel. He knew that voice. Knew it better than he wished he did, Melania Trump. His chest tightened. He didn't respond right away, but she didn't seem to mind. "I knew you would take this flight," she continued, her voice calm, almost expectant. "You were always too proud to run forever." Daniel swallowed hard. "What do you want?" A pause. Then, a simple, haunting reply. "The truth." His breath stalled. The truth. The very thing he had spent years trying to bury. Outside, the engines hummed to life. The runway stretched ahead. But Daniel knew, deep down, that this wasn't just another flight. This was the moment everything changed, and there was no turning back. Daniel sat frozen in the cockpit, Melania's words echoing in his ears. The truth. He had spent years avoiding it, burying it beneath flight schedules and long-haul routes, thinking that if he never looked back, the past would stay where it belonged. But here it was, catching up to him at 35,000 feet. He exhaled slowly, steadying his voice. "I don't know what you're talking about." A soft, almost knowing sigh came through the headset. "You always were stubborn, Daniel." His grip tightened on the controls, his mind racing. He didn't want to do this. Not here. Not now. Not with Barron sitting just a few feet away in the cabin. But then, she said something that made his breath catch. He deserves to know. His heart pounded. Barron! This wasn't about politics or security or some past job that had gone wrong. This was about Barron. Daniel's hands felt cold against the controls. His mind flashed back to a time long before private jets and high-profile passengers, a time when he was just a young pilot in training, stationed overseas, caught in a world he didn't fully understand, and a time when he met her. The memories hit him all at once. The late-night conversations, the secret meetings, the way she looked at him, not as a soldier or a pilot, but as someone she trusted, someone she cared about. And then, the moment everything changed, the moment she told him she was leaving, that she was stepping into a life she was meant to have, one that didn't include him. He had walked away, never looking back, until now. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Does he know?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "No," Melania said, "not yet." A wave of emotions crashed over him, relief, fear, anger. He didn't know what he wanted anymore. "I thought you should be the one to tell him." Daniel turned, looking toward the cabin door. Barron sat in one of the wide leather seats, staring out the window, lost in thought. He was young, but not a boy anymore. He was growing into a man, one who deserved the truth, no matter how much it might change things. But was Daniel ready to give it to him? For the first time in years, he didn't know what to do. He had spent his life making split-second decisions, navigating storms, handling emergencies without hesitation. But this was different. Taking a deep breath, he unbuckled his seatbelt and stood. James gave him a questioning glance, but Daniel didn't say a word. He pushed open the cockpit door and stepped into the cabin. Barron looked up, meeting his gaze. "Something wrong?" Daniel hesitated, his chest tightening. Then, with a slow nod, he sat down across from him. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. Barron frowned slightly, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "Okay." Daniel took a deep breath, knowing that the next words he spoke would change everything, and for the first time in his life, he was ready.